February 9th, 1982. The North 17 naval base on the Kola Peninsula is shrouded in cold. The wind from the Barents Sea pierces even through the thick canvas raincoats of the sentries standing guard at the cargo dock. A thick, almost tangible fog rises from the sea, clinging to the masts of patrol boats and radar antennas. In the distance, in the gray dawn, the silhouettes of underwater vessels standing on the frozen water are barely discernible. Here, in the permafrost, the usual laws of nature obey a different logic, the one dictated by the icy abyss of the northern seas. The message was received by the headquarters the night before. The fishing trawler Ognev found the charred hull of an object resembling a deep-sea station in open water. At first, the crew decided that these were the remains of an American vehicle, possibly an experimental one, but as the ship approached, it became clear. In front of them was the AS-18 Leninets, a Soviet deep-sea research module that disappeared 4 days ago during a mission at a depth of 8,000 meters. It couldn't be. After the last communication, the device went underwater and never surfaced again. Satellite monitoring did not record any anomalies, but now he is here, slowly drifting at the very edge of the pack ice, bobbing on the waves. According to official data, the entire AC-18 team was presumed dead. 12 people, the best experts in deep-sea research, forever lost in the abyss. But when the search team boarded the module, they found everyone. 12 bodies. They were in their places, in the safety of the airlock compartments, strapped in. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of injury. Only their eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, in some kind of senseless, frozen horror. Everyone has dry, pale skin, like people who have spent too much time in icy water. Death was pronounced immediately after arrival. The doctors did not find a pulse, his lungs were not breathing, and his eyes were not blinking. The bodies didn't feel cold, as one would expect, but something subtly wrong, something that defied medical explanation. But the strangest thing started later. 6 hours after arrival, at 04:29, one of them opened his eyes. KGB Colonel Artyom Vlasov jumped out of the truck, heading straight for the medical building. He was accompanied by 3 operatives in long gray greatcoats. Inside, in the operating room, there was a tense silence. Vlasov stepped into the hall and saw the officers standing at the far wall, holding machine guns at the ready. On the bed, under the bright light of a surgical lamp, sat a man wrapped in a thin hospital sheet. It was Senior Lieutenant Vitaly Gromov, the mechanic of the AC-18. According to the documents, he was dead. "Can someone tell me what the hell is going on here?" Vlasov gritted his teeth, looking at the doctors. The head doctor adjusted his glasses with a trembling hand. He just sat down. Woke up. "Are you awake?" The colonel frowned. "Are you sure that he was there at all?" "Dead?" The doctor swallowed nervously. "Absolutely." Vlasov took a step forward, examining the man on the cot. Gromov sat motionless, not blinking, not moving, just staring straight ahead. "Lieutenant Gromov, can you hear me?" Vlasov asked. The man in front of him slowly turned his head. His lips twitched slightly, and his voice sounded emotionless, dry, unnaturally flat. "It's dark. Deeper. Listen. Open it." There was a deathly silence in the room. "Repeat," Vlasov ordered. But Gromov was already staring into space again, expressionless. "What's he talking about?" one of the officers asked quietly. "Does he even understand what he's saying? Have you checked his brain activity?" The doctor nodded, nervously rubbing his temples. "We've done an EEG. Colonel, he doesn't have normal brain waves. Activity is 0. It's like it's just a shell, and there's emptiness inside." Vlasov was silent. Lieutenant Vitaly Gromov was alive, but there was no human inside him anymore, and that was just the beginning. The day after Gromov's awakening, the Sever-17 base froze in anxious tension. The officers avoided looking into each other's eyes. The doctors endlessly consulted the equipment, but the devices could not explain the main thing. Gromov was breathing and moving, but he was not alive in the usual sense of the word. He didn't eat, drink, or react to light, temperature, or pain. He just sat there until someone asked him a question, after which he answered with short, meaningless phrases, words that did not add up to a meaningful text. But the most disturbing thing was ahead. In the dead of night, at 02:15, an emergency signal was received from the base. When the task force arrived at the medical unit, they saw empty beds. All 12 bodies are missing. Colonel Vlasov strode down the corridor with a quick, hard step, ignoring the icy air dripping from the walls and the officers hiding in the shadows. Each of them had the same look, scared, puzzled, empty. The medical unit smelled of iodine, blood, and something brackish, like seawater. The bodies couldn't disappear on their own. In the room where Gromov had been lying the day before, there were now only bare bunks with torn straps. "Surveillance cameras?" Vlasov asked coldly. One of the junior officers swallowed. "Colonel, the cameras didn't record anything. At one point, they all just went dark." "Darkened?" "Yes, sir. They were not disabled. They just stopped showing anything." Vlasov clenched his teeth. Whatever it was, it disabled the video surveillance not physically, but in some other way. He turned his gaze to the walls. Thin, broken scratches left marks on the paneling. Someone scratched the metal with their bare fingers, leaving inscriptions as thin as cuts. Vlasov stepped closer. The letters ran out in jagged lines, as if they had been written in a hurry, in some kind of hysterical fit. At that moment, something creaked in the hallway. One of the officers spun around, raising his machine gun. Vlasov saw him looking at the dark passage leading to the tool warehouse. Someone was standing there. They moved slowly, with an unnaturally steady step. 12 people, all those who were thought to be dead. Without overalls, they were barefoot, with pale skin, from which thin moisture flowed. Their faces were lifeless, but their eyes didn't reflect the light. Gromov stepped forward. He had nothing in his hands. They were not armed. They did not show aggression. They just walked, without any sounds, without a shadow of emotion on their faces. "Stop!" one of the guards shouted, pointing his weapon. But no one stopped. "Freeze, damn it!" Gromov blinked. At that moment, an explosive shot rang out. The bullet went straight into his chest. He stopped. He lowered his head. A black, thick liquid slowly flowed over his skin, spreading over his pale body. But he didn't fall. He just raised his head again and smiled. "It's dark, deeper, listen, open it." Vlasov drew his pistol. Something went wrong, very wrong. Corpses don't smile. They don't move after being shot at point-blank range. They don't get up, they don't keep walking, they don't speak in voices that echo as if coming from thousands of meters of water. Artyom Vlasov understood that they should not have returned. They couldn't go back. Something was inside their bodies, tugging at their tendons, giving them the appearance of life. But it wasn't life. It was an imitation. The bullets were useless. After the first shot, no one shot at Gromov anymore. There was no point in that. They just walked on, silently, without sudden movements, as if step by step they occupied a space that did not belong to them. Vlasov made a sign to retreat. They weren't here for the war. They had to figure it out. When the officers closed the door of the main corridor behind them and turned on the emergency locks, Vlasov turned to the operational staff. "Where's Lazarev?" "What's that?" he snapped. "Downstairs," one of the analysts replied. "Lazarev, chief specialist in radio frequency research. He was the key to all of this." The communications bunker was located underground at a depth of 15 meters. 2 shafts led there, one main shaft equipped with a lock system and an emergency staircase, which was almost never used. Vlasov ordered the upper levels to be sealed off, and no one allowed inside until they figured out what the hell was going on. The temperature dropped noticeably with each passing meter. The humidity here was abnormal. The air seemed to thicken, stick to the skin, and smell like the sea. It was impossible. The base was located far from the water, in a closed, completely isolated space. Lazarev met them at the technical center, surrounded by piles of documents and flickering instrument lights. "Do you know what's going on here, Lazarev?" Vlasov asked without preamble. He looked up sharply. "Colonel." His voice was tired and trembling. "They're back, aren't they?" Vlasov looked at him in silence. Lazarev swallowed noisily. "Colonel, they're not who they used to be." Vlasov slowly lowered his palm onto the table. "What do you know?" Lazarev ran his hand over his face. "The signal. It's all because of the signal." In 1977, Soviet researchers recorded an anomalous pulse from a depth of 8,000 meters in the Barents Sea. The wave was too orderly, too artificial to be just a natural phenomenon. A few years later, we responded. We sent a test radio signal down to the coordinates of the source. The first response came in 17 hours and 29 minutes, but it wasn't just a signal. It was a recording. She was repeating our own words. Then it was attributed to the reflection of the wave, radio echo, unknown relief layers at the bottom. But then the disappearances started. We shouldn't have sent the AC-18 team to the source, Lazarev sighed wearily. But we were forced. The Soviet Union needed answers. 12 of the best officers and scientists went down. But something was there. Vlasov slowly sat down. What is it? Lazarev licked his dry lips. No one knows. The commander's last message read, "It's too big, it's too alive." The connection was cut, and now they're back. One of the analysts looked up sharply from his instruments. Colonel, we're getting a new signal. Everyone in the room froze. Lazarev slowly stepped towards the equipment, looking at the flickering screen. Someone was talking, in Russian, in the voice of Artyom Vlasov. Listen to me, deeper, open it. But the colonel did not utter these words. Someone spoke for him. The signal wasn't coming from the water. He was coming from inside the base. Vlasov stared at the flickering screen and felt a cold, sticky fear running down his spine. It was his voice. Clear, recognizable, even with the same intonations. But he didn't say that. Lazarev switched the frequency slowly, almost without breathing, trying to identify the source of the signal. For a moment, the speakers crackled, and a rasping echo sounded in the headphones, similar to the sound of the depths of the sea. Then the voice again. Listen to me. Deeper. Open it. At that moment, the equipment clicked and went out. The lights in the bunker flickered, then there was a muffled crackle of wires. Something's out of order. Lazarev jumped up. This can't be happening. Vlasov whirled around. What the hell can't be happening? Lazarev clutched the table convulsively. The signal is coming from inside. We know. No, the scientist's voice cracked. He's moving. At the same moment, an urgent message was broadcast on the radio from the upper levels of the base. The command center. Urgently. They're coming. Hissing, crackling static. Repeat that, Vlasov barked, grabbing the radio from the nearest signalman. The answer was indistinct, as if someone was trying to speak, but his voice was choking. Then the noise stopped. The room was deathly silent for a moment. Prepare your weapons, Vlasov said calmly, already pulling out his Makarov pistol. The officers silently reloaded their machine guns. We're going upstairs. When they got out of the bunker, the air seemed different. There was a strange, musty chill in the upper levels, unlike the usual Arctic frost. It was something else. The control room was empty. There was not a single person where the staff was on duty an hour ago. Water dripped down the walls. Vlasov clenched his teeth. Where is everyone? The answer came from behind. There was the sound of footsteps. They weren't fast. Smooth, measured, but wrong. The heavy boots thudded against the metal panels of the floor. Someone was slowly approaching. The operatives' automatic rifles turned synchronously in the direction of the sound. The first to appear in the aisle was the commander of the base, Captain Oleg Samoylov. He was wearing his uniform greatcoat, soaked in moisture. His face was ordinary, but he didn't blink. He just stood there. Vlasov took a step forward. Captain, what's going on? Samoylov opened his mouth. It's dark. Deeper. Listen. Open it. And he smiled. At that moment, something else moved in the darkness behind him. They were everywhere. People who were alive until recently. Officers, scientists, engineers. Now they just stood there. Dry seawater ran down their cheeks, down their fingers, and onto the floor. Their eyes did not reflect the light. They were silent. Only Samoylov took a step forward. Listen to me. Deeper. Open it. And then a second voice. Listen to me. Deeper. Open it. Third. Fourth. Soon they were all saying the same thing in one voice, not synchronously, but like an echo, scattering in different parts of the hall. They weren't people. They were copied. Vlasov raised his pistol. Fire! The first salvo broke the silence. A burst of machine guns pierced the ranks of the dead, but they didn't fall. The bullets didn't work. Just like then, in the medical unit. Get back! Back! Vlasov shouted, realizing that their weapons were useless. But then Samoylov ran, with a jerk, unnaturally fast. It was as if he was being pushed by something from outside. His lips were still smiling. Vlasov shot him right in the head. Samoylov stopped. I looked at him without a trace of emotion. And then he laughed. Cold, soundlessly. It was as if someone was playing with his voice, and Vlasov realized the terrible truth. They're not dead. They never died. They were just waiting. Vlasov did not lower the pistol. An icy fear raged in his chest, but his mind remained cold and calculating. Samoylov continued to stand there, grinning, with a hole in his forehead from which no blood was flowing. The others stood silently behind him. They didn't move, they didn't rush forward, but something in their poses, in their frozen gazes, made my heart beat faster. They were waiting. "Retreat!" Vlasov commanded sharply, backing away. The officers obediently followed, keeping the living dead at gunpoint. They moved cautiously along the corridor, trying not to create panic. The main thing is not to let these things trap them. When the group reached the airlock door, Vlasov's first order of business was to block it. The metal barrier came down with a dull clang, cutting off the infected sector. "What the hell was that?" One of the fighters gasped, clutching his machine gun so that his knuckles turned white. They didn't even try to attack." The other shook his head. "Because they don't need to," Lazarev said quietly. "They're not afraid of us." Vlasov gave him a hard look. "Explain yourself." Lazarev ran his hand over his face, smearing the sweat. "They're not dead, Colonel, but they're not alive either. They're copies." "What?" "It's not just bodies. It's something that has learned to look like us, repeat us." Vlasov frowned, clenching his teeth. "What do you mean?" "They didn't just come back, Colonel. They're not who they used to be." He paused, looking around as if searching for the right words. "We do not know what is at the depth, but it is able to interact with reality. It records, copies it, our signals, our frequencies, and now, it seems, ourselves." "Bullshit," one of the officers snapped. Lazarev swallowed hard. "You saw what happened to the captain, shot in the head," and he just smiled. He turned to Vlasov and, lowering his voice, said slowly, "Colonel, are you sure we're the only ones here?" A muffled click sounded in the silence. Everyone froze. The click was repeated, then another one. Vlasov slowly turned around. The airlock door that they had just sealed was slowly being lifted. Someone was opening it from the other side. The fingers showed first. They were long, pale, and wet, as if they had just been lifted out of icy water. Then the hand. She moved too smoothly, almost fluidly. A second later, a head appeared from behind the door. It was Samoylov, the same captain that Vlasov shot. Now he was crawling. "They shouldn't move like that," Lazarev whispered. But Samoylov was already up. He didn't rush, didn't attack, didn't make a sound. He just smiled. Others started coming out behind him. They didn't run. They didn't talk. They were just walking. Vlasov raised his pistol and fired 2 shots. Both hit Samoylov in the chest. He stopped. His head turned slowly to the side like a doll's. Then he took another step forward. The bullets didn't work. "Take cover!" Vlasov barked, and everyone rushed back. There were soft, rhythmic footsteps behind him. They weren't in a hurry. They knew they couldn't be stopped. The group ran into the technical unit and locked themselves in the control room. Lazarev frantically typed in the codes, connecting to the self-destruct system. "Colonel," muttered one of the signalmen. They're talking." Vlasov whirled around. His voice was coming out of the speakers again. "Listen to me. Deeper. Open it." The voice was repeated several times, as if different versions of himself were speaking at the same time. Then the speakers crackled, and there was a sound of breathing. Someone's quiet, slow breathing. It came from everywhere. "Activate the destruction protocol, urgently," Vlasov shouted. Lazarev activated the console with trembling fingers. "The explosive mechanism is connected. Launch in 3 minutes." "Colonel," one of the officers shouted, pointing at the screen. "The security cameras are working again." They showed the corridors, but there was no one there. Footsteps could be heard everywhere, but the cameras showed nothing. Vlasov felt an icy realization squeeze his entire being. They're here. They're everywhere. It was only now that he realized the most terrifying detail. These steps were their steps, but they weren't here. They heard themselves in the future. The signal was not just a transmission. He was a warning. Lazarev whispered, looking at the monitor, "Take a look." An inscription flashed on the screen. It was not a self-destruct system. She was a recording. She's been here since the beginning. Someone introduced her before they arrived. "They're already here. Listen. Go deeper." Vlasov slowly lowered his gaze to his hands. They were shaking, as if he already knew what was going to happen next. Time flowed like sand through my fingers. 3 minutes. Vlasov felt them like heartbeats, booming and inescapable. The corridors outside the door remained empty, but the footsteps did not stop. They were not sharp. They did not approach threateningly. No, it was a monotonous, slow rhythm, like the pulse of something huge, something that had already penetrated here, spread through the base like water in a hole. Lazarev frantically checked the indicators with the explosive device systems. The reactor overload was supposed to bring down the entire complex within 2 minutes, but now Vlasov was tormented by doubt. Was this the right decision? They still didn't understand what was going on here. If the base is destroyed, will this stop the threat? Or would it just open the way for her to move on? Lazarev suddenly stopped his hands over the keyboard. This is not a break-in. This code was entered in advance. Vlasov slowly turned his head. "What are you talking about?" "Self-destruct protocol." Lazarev's voice was trembling. "It was activated before us, even before we arrived at the base. This couldn't be happening." Vlasov himself saw how they launched the system. He personally gave the order, but if the code had already been entered, that meant only one thing. They've done it before. "This is a recording, Colonel. We repeat the cycle. We're here again." Those words stabbed into his mind like red-hot needles. They weren't the first. Someone has already tried to do this before them, and every time, unsuccessfully. Each new arrival led to the same thing. The base was sealed, the transmission came from inside, people disappeared, and then everything happened again, and again. The speakers cracked and crackled. "Listen to me. Deeper. Open it." Faces began to appear on the screens. Blurred, flooded with darkness, they flashed in the depths of the signal. But Vlasov recognized himself among them. His own figure, sitting in the same room, in the same chair. They've seen it before. They've done it before. Only now Vlasov understood the meaning. This signal is not from the past, and not from the future. He was timeless. "It's time," Lazarev croaked. "They're not the ones coming. It's us, coming back." Vlasov turned abruptly, the last seconds. He was no longer sure if he was still in reality, but one thing was for sure, the base had to be destroyed. Whatever it is, it must not leave here. Exactly 3 seconds before detonation, the speakers wheezed for the last time. "It's you!" The world exploded with white light. Dark. Nothing at first. The silence is like in the depths of the ocean. Then a slow hum, as if someone was talking, but through thousands of meters of water. Vlasov opened his eyes. He was sitting in his chair. There was a flickering signal on the screen. There were footsteps outside the door. Lazarev turned sharply to him. "Colonel, this is not a hack. This code was entered in advance." Vlasov slowly closed his eyes.